Okay, so last night I read my first Christina Lauren book. I have never read any books from them before, and I think I started maybe at the worst one. I'd like to be hopeful and say that this is like their bottom line, like worst book, and that it gets better from there, just because I hated this. I read Beautiful Bastard. I didn't realize when I picked it up that it is based on their Twilight fan fiction, which I think if I had known that, I probably would have stayed away from it. Not that I have anything against fan fiction, but specifically like Twilight, 50 Shades vibes isn't necessarily where I'm at these days. That being said, I did read it. I did read it. I read the whole thing and I hated it. Chloe and Bennett are just like the most unlikable main characters I've read in a really long time. And I realized as I was writing my like Goodreads review for this book that mainly my issue is with Bennett, but Chloe did lose me at certain points. So like, let's just talk through it. So starting off, we have no concept of what this relationship between Chloe and her boss, Bennett, looks like, other than the fact that they definitely don't get along. Like, she's having just the worst day ever. She literally got in a car accident and he's like, "You're late," and just like throws a million more things at her. And they apparently don't have good enough relationship for her to be like, "I was in a car accident," and for her to think he'd understand. So like, they never even touch on that. Clearly it's not a good relationship. So he's like, "Okay, well, we're staying late tonight because you were late today." Throws all this extra work at her, is just insufferable, and she just like takes it, but very clearly like the way that they speak to each other is just like incredibly disrespectful on both sides. But as the boss, like, he should be setting the precedent for that, so I blame him for that. During this meeting that he made her stay late for, you can see where this is going, right? During this meeting, all of a sudden he's just touching her for the first time. There's no context as to why he thought that that would be accepted by her and that she'd be okay with that and comfortable with that. Like, there's none of that. So in my head, he's just going for it in a super inappropriate way. Like, to me, this is just like, might as well be reading it straight from the HR file. But no, it starts there. And then I was also kind of alarmed that like no conversation about any sort of protection was had. Like, it was very intentionally not had. And I think that's my problem with it. It's one thing if it's just kind of like, they don't touch on it, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But when it very clearly intentionally is mentioned that it doesn't happen, especially when there's already this existing power dynamic there, like, I really hate that. I really hate that. And it takes like 2 full times of him not even considering anything for her to be like, "By the way, I take something. You're an asshole for not even asking." Because he is. Like, this should have been brought up in the very first moment. Again, context. It's not even miscommunication, it's just no communication whatsoever. So from there, even after their physical relationship starts, because it literally starts in like chapter 1, after their physical relationship starts, they're still like absolutely hating each other. And it's also not really clear as to why they hate each other. Like, they both seem to be totally fine and professional outside of their own personal relationship. He's still like cranky with other people, but we see plenty of instances where he's like very professional, very loving with his family. Like, there's no reason for him to be this way with her, nor was there a reason for her to hate him other than the fact that like he started this and he's her boss and he sets the precedent for their relationship. So truly it's Bennett that I have an issue with. Like, he claims to be like super professional and formal and calling everyone like Mr., Mrs., whatever their last name is, like super formal, except for the fact that he goes around in his office calling Chloe a bitch to her face and also to her coworkers. So like, that's not at all formal or professional. So there's like a disconnect there. They're also like being intimate all over the office. So like, also not formal or professional in any way, shape, or form there. Bennett was really my issue with all of this. Like, at one point in time, Chloe is gone for a week because she's helping with her father, who's like getting some tests done. He might be having some like medical issues, they're not sure yet. So she goes to help her father. She's gone for the week, and she has like a temp in her place to help him with like what she would normally be doing. And he literally has like this inner monologue moment where he's like looking forward to working with a professional man instead of a overly emotional female. This was at 55% of the way into the book. I feel like at 55% of the way into a story, you should be wanting me to like your characters. That's not a way to do it. That makes me think you're still an asshole. And like, there's so many moments where he like has this disconnect. Like towards the end, he kind of gets the fact that there's like a power dynamic, but like in the beginning, he literally doesn't understand. He's like, what do you mean I have power in this situation? I have power over you, Chloe. I don't have any power over you because I'm so in love with you. Like, he literally thinks that like she's holding all the power in this situation and doesn't understand that because she reports to him that this could hurt her career. So I really hold Bennett accountable for most of my hatred in this book. However, there is a certain part where his whole thing is he likes to like rip her garments off of her. So he gets her, like he opens a line of credit for her to use at a very expensive store. And she gets really mad about this. She storms away, they start screaming at each other, and then she just hits him. She hits him. Again, no communication, but straight to physical violence. You're gonna lose me there. It's not a love story. You literally call each other the worst names, you're super disrespectful, and then you hit each other. She hits you. No. Overall, I feel like Chloe and Bennett are the most insufferable main characters that I've read in a really long time. However, I do think they deserve each other. I haven't like hate read a book in a really long time, but I hated that, and I read the whole thing. It wasn't a super long read, but like, it's not on Kindle Unlimited. I paid for that ebook. I am not happy about it. So I guess my whole thing here is I know Christina Lauren, they have written many books. So many of them are on all sorts of social medias. Like, people go hard for these. So if you're one of those people, what's the best book? Like, what book am I supposed to start with? Because if not, I'm kind of considering just like going through the Goodreads ratings and seeing what their most highly rated book is and reading that just as a comparison. I know that Beautiful Bastard was written in 2013, so it very much was probably of the time of Twilight, 50 Shades, things like that. Like, it could be just like a cultural shift. I could see that. I'm thinking I want to read like the best Christina Lauren book and now kind of compare. See where we've grown into and maybe understand the hype around these books a little bit better. Though I will say I read Every Summer After, not a Christina Lauren book, but I hated this book, and a lot of people compare it to Love in Other Words, so I'm thinking to stay away from that one specifically because I really hated this one. Maybe like the Soulmate Equation, is that a good one? Okay, so I gave Christina Lauren a second chance, and I'm glad that I did because the Soulmate Equation was so much better than Beautiful Bastard. I don't even think these books can be compared. Within the Soulmate Equation, we have Jessica and River, and they're kind of like rivals. Like, they don't really like each other. They know each other just from like the coffee shop that both of them visit. He is a geneticist who started this company that like matches people based off of genetics into like love matches. And she is a statistician, she's a single mother. She's kind of given up on dating in general, but her and her friend end up going and taking these tests from his company because like they have this weird interaction at the coffee shop where she's like, I heard you're a matchmaker, and he's like, I'm a geneticist. And she's like, well, I heard you're a matchmaker. And he's like, okay, well, I have this company. And her friend, his name is Fizzy. Her friend named Fizzy, I like wasn't entirely sure. I was like kind of worried that she might ruin the story because one, her name was Fizzy, and two, she like instigated a lot of secondhand embarrassment for me throughout the story, which like it started with her, but it definitely like grew past her. Like, there was so much secondhand embarrassment within this story. Like, at one point in time, I don't know why this was ever mentioned, but they mentioned that Fizzy, who's a romance author, based one of the love interests in her romance books off of one of her relatives. that she had a crush on before she knew they were relatives. And I was like, what are we doing here? Where are we going? Why did I need to know that information? But moving past that, because that was within the first like 10 pages, they go to this place to learn more about this genetic testing for love, because like as a romance author, her friend is like, this is research for me. And Jessica's like, well, I kind of gave up on dating, but like, I guess I'll go with you and be a good friend. While there, they learn about like the types of matches that you can find, anywhere from like a base match to a diamond match. And it just so happens that a diamond match is anything over like 90, and they've only ever had like 3 of them. But anything from like 60 to 80 is considered fantastic. So they leave, and then like Jess and River end up having like a series of unfortunate encounters where they both walk away with like negative associations of each other because they just like don't get along. But within those series of days, Jess is just having like a rough time to begin with. She wasn't sure if she was gonna take that genetic test to find a love match. But because she had such terrible days back to back to back, she hits a low point and is like, fine, I'm submitting this thing for me. I'm gonna do it for me and see where it goes. But she sets her range really, really, really high, saying like, I only want to be matched with people who meet like, I don't know if they ever give a number, but it must have been like 80 plus or something very high. Her friend Fizzy starts getting matches like immediately because she submitted her kit immediately, and she was going on dates with like 13s and 20s and 31s. So Jess just assumed that like the same would start happening to her. Instead, they end up messaging through her through the app, and they're like, can you please come into our office as soon as possible? And she's thinking like, oh, something probably went wrong with like her testing kit, like maybe like she brushed her teeth and like it got like the toothpaste like contaminated it. And so she's thinking she needs to like retake this test. And they're like, it's really important, we really need you to come back in. And so she's like, okay. They're like, we'll send a car for you. And then she's like, this is weird. This is weird. So they send a car for her, they come to pick her up. She walks into her room and realizes it's every single person from the board except for River, who's in this room having this meeting with her. And she's like, this is very strange. And then eventually like River joins in, and he's like, what is she doing here? What's going on? They hand them both these packets. River has gone completely silent, and Jess is thinking like, oh, I'm a statistician and they just handed me an outlier. They don't know what to do with this outlier. Their company's about to go public in like 3 months. So they have this outlier because what they handed her was a diamond match of 98 that they had never seen before. So she's thinking like data. She's thinking, how do we test this? And like River is still silent. And then she looks at the client numbers and she's like, who's client number 1? And everyone looks at River and she's like, and he's still just like shell shocked. And so she's like, okay, well then who's client number 144,576? And everyone looks at her and she's like, excuse me. They told them that they were a diamond match in the most uncomfortable way I could think of. I had to put the book down multiple times while reading it because I was so uncomfortable. If I were in that situation, I legitimately think I would have been thrown into like a panic attack because like, what the hell? It's so strange. But Jess is like, this is way too weird. And she just leaves. And like River kind of like chases after her at one point in time, but like he wants to talk to her. He's like, this is really weird. And like they don't really know what to say because they're both just shocked. And so she leaves. She has somebody come and pick her up because remember, like they came and got her. And she decides, she's like, I'm just gonna ignore this. This is too weird. This is not what I wanted. I'm ignoring it. But then a couple days later, one of the board members like comes up to her, like finds her and is like, hey, we really need to talk to you. We have a lot of questions. Will you give us a chance? Let us talk to you. We're gonna make it worth your while. She again has had a series of unfortunate days where she just lost one of her biggest clients and she's super stressed and she's like, okay, I'll meet you for dinner. Turns out that they had also invited River to this dinner and like not told her. They didn't tell River that they didn't tell her, and so he's like, okay, well then this is awkward. And then they essentially proposition her, which River also didn't know about. So then they're both uncomfortable. Essentially they're like, what if we pay you to date him? Because she's like, I don't have any free time. Like I had to pick up extra work because I lost this giant client. And they're like, well, what if we pay you to see him a few times a week and see if this love match is real? If I thought the first interaction with the entire board team was uncomfortable, this one was even worse. Then we had to go through the whole pain of having them sign these contracts because there was also going to be like publicity around this relationship because of the fact that they were going public with their IPO in a couple months. This was huge publicity for them. So there's a bit of like a fake dating relationship aspect to this as well. There wasn't a ton of the like, oh, is this fake or is this real? Like, there is some of that from her perspective because he does stand to make a lot of money if publicity helps with the launch of their company going public. She's skeptical, but they like are very honest with each other. It kind of takes some of that tension away. And they just start to form like a very sweet, genuine connection with each other. The chemistry is absolutely there. He's also very respectful of the boundaries she has on having a relationship with her daughter, and like the dynamic there, which I appreciate. So like there's definitely the third act breakup part, but this communication, Bennett and Chloe could never. I did enjoy the Soulmate Equation. I think I gave it like a 4 out of 5 just because the secondhand embarrassment prevented me from fully appreciating this story. I did find this one really interesting because when I read like fantasy or dystopian like sci-fi type things, the idea of fated mates is a trope that I do gravitate towards. It's something that I like, but when it comes to like contemporary romance, it's not something that you almost ever see. But this book did kind of have that. Like they had like the fated mates type situation, but usually in fantasy, there's like some sort of natural instinct pulling the mates together so that they like go with it. Within contemporary romance, within this story, you did not get that, so it was incredibly uncomfortable, and it really showed the downside to a fated mate situation and how uncomfortable and awkward and how much pressure that puts on a relationship. So I did enjoy that side of this trope, and I do like River and Jessica, so I totally understand how somebody could read this story and be on board with Christina Lauren. I feel like this was a very good redemption arc. I think I would read another Christina Lauren book, but I think I would have to dig in and do some research before I just like jumped in blindly. If you're somebody who really likes Christina Lauren, please leave in a comment below like what your favorite book from them is, because I did really like the Soulmate Equation, but I know that there's a lot more that people talk about all the time. While you're there, maybe like the video, subscribe to the channel. And if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Yeah.